When they hand you a black trash bag on your 18th birthday, you learn something about the world that no one should ever have to learn. You learn that your whole life, everything you own, every letter, every photograph, every scrap of who you used to be, fits into something designed to hold garbage. That is the exact message they want to send. They want you to know that the state is done with you, that you are from this moment forward no longer their problem. I stood on the cracked concrete steps of the Bayside Group home in Sacramento, holding that trash bag in one hand and a thin manila envelope in the other. Inside the envelope was my birth certificate, my social security card, a bus token, and $78 in worn bills. My official severance from the state of California. My parting gift for surviving 6 years inside a system that measured love in paperwork and hope in expiration dates. The morning sky was the color of wet newspaper, a low gray that pressed down on the rooftops like it was trying to suffocate the whole city. I could smell exhaust from the freeway 3 blocks over, and underneath it, the faint rot of the dumpsters behind the kitchen. 6 years of that smell. 6 years of waking up to it, falling asleep to it, letting it settle into my clothes and my hair, until I stopped noticing. My name is Lena Hollis. I am 18 years old, and somewhere upstairs behind a window reinforced with chicken wire, my little sister was watching me leave. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I turned around and saw Nora's face pressed against that glass, I would break. And I could not afford to break. Not yet. Not on the sidewalk with Mr. Harlan standing in the doorway behind me, already lighting his first cigarette of the day, already looking past me toward the next file on his desk. "You got the key, Hollis," he said. His voice had that flat administrative weariness of a man who had signed out 100 kids before me and expected to sign out 100 more. I held it up. A single tarnished brass key, old-fashioned, the kind with a long shaft and a round bow. It had arrived a week earlier in a padded envelope from a law firm I had never heard of, forwarded from an address I had not seen since I was 12. And the lawyer's address. I have it. He took a long drag. His eyes narrowed against the smoke. "Look, kid. I'm gonna say this once because I've seen this exact movie about 400 times. Old farms out in the valley. They're more debt than dirt. You go look at it, you get sentimental. You do something stupid. Don't. There's an offer on the table. Take the money. Rent a room. Get a job at a warehouse. Come back in 3 years and get your sister when she ages out. That's the play." I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the yellow stain in his mustache, at the gravy spot on his tie, at the way his belt cinched too tight above his belly. I wondered if he had any children of his own, and if he did, whether he handed them garbage bags when they left his house. "Thank you for your advice, Mr. Harlan," I said. "Don't get your hopes up, Hollis. Hope is a luxury. You can't afford luxuries anymore." I walked down the steps. My duffel bag, not the trash bag. I had refused the trash bag on principle. The duffel bag bounced against my hip. The door clicked shut behind me, a quiet administrative snap. A period at the end of a sentence I had not written. Somewhere above me, I felt Nora's eyes, 15 years old. 3 more years in the system. 3 more years of fluorescent hallways and powdered eggs and group therapy where no one ever said anything true. I had promised her I would come back for her. I had promised her that I would find us a place. Real walls, real windows, somewhere where the locks worked from the inside. At the corner, I finally let myself glance up, and there she was. Second floor, east window. Her forehead pressed to the glass. She did not wave. She just watched. I pressed my palm flat against my chest over my heart and held it there. Our old signal. The one we had invented when they first put us in separate wings back when she was 9. And I was 12 and the world had just finished falling apart the first time. Then I turned the corner and she was gone. The bus into downtown smelled like wet wool and old coffee. I sat in the back with my duffel on my lap and watched the city slide past the window. Pawn shops, nail salons, a man pushing a shopping cart full of aluminum cans, a woman in a business suit crying into her phone. I felt invisible. I felt like a ghost moving through a world of the living. The lawyer's office was on the 23rd floor of a glass tower that cut the low sky like a blade. The lobby was all polished marble and recessed lighting and women in heels whose clicks on the floor sounded like a language I could not speak. I clutched my duffel bag tighter and tried to look like I belonged. I did not. I knew I did not. Everyone in that lobby knew I did not. But I held my chin up anyway because my grandmother had told me once a long time ago that posture was the one thing the world could not take from you. The lawyer's name was Adelaide Vance. She did not stand when I entered. She gestured to a chair across from a desk so large and so polished that I could see the ceiling lights reflected in its surface. Her suit was the color of storm clouds. Her haircut was severe. Her pen was gold. Everything about her was expensive, and nothing about her was warm. "Ms. Hollis," she said, "please sit." I sat. As you know, you have reached the age of majority. As the sole surviving heir of Theodore Hollis, you are entitled to the disposition of his estate. I assume you have questions? I had 1,000 questions. I asked the simplest one. What's left? She slid a folder across the desk. The property consists of 34 acres in Oak Valley, approximately 3 hours north of here. A farmhouse, a barn, several outbuildings, an irrigation pond. The land has been vacant for 6 years. It is, to put it plainly, a ruin. I opened the folder. A faded aerial photograph stared back at me. Green oaks, a white house, a red barn. My chest tightened in a way I had not expected. Your grandfather passed with significant debts, Adelaide Vance continued. The primary liability is 6 years of unpaid property tax, with penalties and interest. The current balance owed to the county is $94,521. I stared at the number. It sat there on the page like an animal. Enormous, unafraid. The county has scheduled a tax auction for the property in 30 days, she said. If the balance is not paid in full by that date, the land will be sold to the highest bidder. You would receive any remaining proceeds, if any. 30 days, I repeated. There is, however, an offer on the table. She slid a second document toward me. Ironheart Development Corporation has been attempting to acquire your grandfather's property for some time. They are prepared to settle the tax liability directly with the county and pay you a personal settlement of $25,000. They require an answer by the end of the week. They wish to close before the auction. $25,000. It was more money than I had ever held in my life. It was a used car, A studio apartment, a semester of community college. It was a way to survive until Nora aged out. It was the Harlan move. Take the money, rent the room, come back in 3 years. I looked down at the aerial photograph again, at the White House under the oaks, at the red barn with its long shadow. Something in my chest, something I had buried so deep I had forgotten it existed, began to move. "Miss Vance," I said, "who is Ironheart?" Her pen paused for the briefest second, then kept moving. "A reputable developer. They have several holdings in the region. They specialize in agricultural consolidation. Why do they want my grandfather's land? It adjoins existing properties in their portfolio. Consolidation creates efficiencies. Efficiencies. Yes." I looked at her. She did not look back. She was making a note on the margin of her legal pad, and her pen moved with the precise small movements of a woman who was used to not answering the questions she did not want to answer. "I want to see it first," I said. She set down her pen. "See what on the farm, before I decide anything." She exhaled a small professional sigh. "Miss Hollis, it is a 3-hour bus ride. There is no taxi service from the stop. The property is a 5-mile walk from the road. There is no power, no running water. The house has been boarded up for 6 years. What exactly do you hope to find?" Hope, I thought, but I did not say it. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I need to look." She studied me for a long moment. Something flickered in her expression. Not pity, not respect. Something colder than either, like a chess player reassessing the board after an unexpected move. "Very well," she said. "The key opens the front door. The property is legally yours to access until the auction. Please do nothing that would diminish its value." I stood. My duffel bag felt heavier than when I had sat down. "Miss Hollis," her voice caught me at the door. "Ironheart's offer is generous. I would encourage you to consider it seriously." "I will," I said. I lied. The bus ride to Oak Valley was 3 hours of the world rearranging itself. Skyscrapers gave way to strip malls. Strip malls gave way to tract housing. Tract housing gave way to fields. Fields gave way to hills. Hills gave way to a wide golden valley dotted with live oaks, the kind that grow slow and wide and dark green, and live for 300 years. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and watched California unfold itself, and something inside me, some small animal that had been holding its breath for 6 years, began cautiously to exhale. The bus dropped me at a crossroads. There was a bench, a trash can, and a sun-bleached sign that read, Oak Valley. That was it. The driver looked at me in his rear-view mirror. "Last bus back to the city is at 6, kid. I'm not going back today." He raised his eyebrows but said nothing. The doors hissed shut. The bus pulled away in a cloud of dust and diesel. And then there was silence. The kind of silence I had not heard in 6 years. The kind of silence that is not actually silence, but wind and grass and the distant low of a cow and the buzz of insects in the dry weeds beside the road. The kind of silence that has a texture, that has a weight, that fills up your lungs differently than city air. I shouldered my duffel and started walking. The sun was high and mean. The asphalt threw up heat in visible waves. I walked past vineyards, their leaves shimmering. I walked past almond orchards, row after row of silent trees standing in perfect military lines. I walked past a collapsed barn, its ribs showing like the skeleton of some enormous dead animal. I walked until my shirt was soaked through and my legs burned and my mouth tasted of dust. And still I walked because somewhere at the end of this road was a house I had not seen in 6 years, and a grandfather I had not buried properly, and a question I had been carrying in my chest since I was 12 years old. The question was this: did he love us enough to have wanted to save us? And if he did, why weren't we saved? I rounded a bend and there it was. 3 massive live oaks, a gravel driveway overgrown with yellow grass, a white farmhouse with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and a roof that looked like it had been patched in places and left to rot in others, windows boarded with plywood, a red barn beyond the house, its great sliding doors slightly ajar, a windmill still turning slowly, its blades creaking with every revolution. I stopped at the head of the driveway. I could not make myself walk forward. Not yet. The last time I had seen this place, I'd been 12 years old. I'd been sitting on the porch steps watching a black car come up this same driveway to take me and Nora away. My grandfather had been dead in the kitchen for 2 days by then. The neighbor had finally called someone. That car had driven me out of this place, and I had watched the white farmhouse shrink in the back window until it disappeared. And I had told myself with all the fury and grief a 12-year-old is capable of, that it did not matter, that none of it mattered, that the only way to survive was to forget. I had done a bad job of forgetting. The gravel crunched under my shoes. Each step was louder than the last in the afternoon stillness. I could feel the house watching me. I could feel my grandmother's wild rose bushes gone thorny and feral, reaching out from the porch railing like they remembered me. I could smell the sun-warmed wood of the siding and, underneath it, the faint ghost of lavender from the beds my grandmother had planted decades ago. I climbed the 3 porch steps, testing each one. The second one groaned under my weight but held. I stood in front of the front door. I took the brass key out of my pocket. I slid it into the lock. It resisted. I jiggled it. I pushed. And then, with a long grating scrape, the tumbler turned and the door swung inward on rusted hinges into a cavern of dust and shadow. I stepped across the threshold, and I was home. The air inside was heavy and still. Shafts of sunlight cut through the grime on the few windows that weren't boarded, and the dust hung in those shafts like suspended stars. The furniture was all still there, draped in white sheets that had gone gray with time. I could see the outline of the old sofa where I used to fall asleep watching black and white movies with my grandfather, the shape of the armchair where he read the newspaper every morning, the long rectangle of the dining table where we had eaten 10,000 meals together, me and Nora and him for the 6 good years of our lives. I walked from room to room. My footsteps echoed in a house that had not heard footsteps in 6 years. I trailed my fingers along the mantel and left a dark streak in the dust. I opened the kitchen door and my breath caught. A coffee cup sat on the counter. A brown ring dried at the bottom. A calendar hung on the wall, still open to May of 2018. The month he died. The month the world ended. That coffee cup had been waiting for him for 6 years. I stood, very still. The grief I had been carrying inside me like a stone for 6 years began to crack. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth. I would not cry. Not yet. Not here. I had to see the rest of the house first. I had to finish walking through it because I had been running from it for so long that I owed it at minimum the courtesy of looking it in the face. I climbed the stairs. They creaked under me. My old bedroom was at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. My baseball posters still hung on the wall, curling at the corners. A model airplane I had built with my grandfather hung from the ceiling by a fishing line, its wings coated in 6 years of dust. I had forgotten about that airplane. I had forgotten how proud I had been of it, how he had let me hold the glue and how his big calloused hands had steadied mine. Nora's room was across the hall. It was painted pink, which she had always hated, and she had covered every inch of the walls with butterfly stickers which she had loved. The stickers were still there, dulled by dust, their wings softened by time, but still there. On her nightstand, face down, was a framed photograph. I lifted it, wiped the glass clean with my thumb. 3 people squinted into the sun. My grandfather in the middle, his flannel sleeves rolled up, his cap pushed back on his head, a broad, tired grin creasing his face, his left arm around a tall, skinny 12-year-old girl with a stubborn chin and her hair in a crooked braid. That was me. His right arm around a little 9-year-old with her 2 front teeth missing, grinning like the world had never once hurt her. That was Nora. We were all happy. You could see it in the photograph. You could see it in the set of our shoulders. We had been for a little while a family. I tucked the photograph into my duffel bag. I would take that with me. Whatever happened next, I would take that with me. I went back outside. The sun was starting to lower. The light had gone from hard gold to soft amber. The oaks threw long blue shadows across the yard. I could hear a hawk circling somewhere overhead, its cry sharp and lonely against the evening. The barn was my grandfather's place. More than the house, more than the fields. The barn was where he had lived his real life. I walked toward it. The great sliding door was half open. I squeezed through the gap. Inside the barn was enormous, cathedral-like. Light streamed in through cracks between the siding boards, striping the dirt floor with bars of gold. The air was rich with the smell of old hay engine grease, sun-warmed wood, dry earth. It was the exact smell of my grandfather. I had not smelled it in 6 years, and the moment it hit me, I felt him there so strongly that I turned around half expecting to see him standing in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. There was no one. Just dust motes, just gold stripes of light. I walked the length of the barn. Old farm equipment rusted quietly in the gloom. A tractor with 2 flat tires. A harvester with its belts hanging loose. A wall of hand tools, their wooden handles gone gray with age. This had been his world. He had built most of this with his own hands, repaired the rest. He used to say that a man who could build something with his own 2 hands would never truly be lost in the world. At the back of the barn was his workshop, a long wooden workbench littered with jars of screws. Half-finished projects, a vise clamped to one corner. I ran my hand along the surface. I could almost hear him humming. He always hummed when he worked. Old country songs, Hank Williams mostly. He hummed off-key and he knew it and he did not care. I turned to leave. And then I stopped. Something was wrong. I could not say what at first. I just felt it. A wrongness in the architecture. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the walls, trying to identify what my eyes had caught, and my brain had not yet processed. It was the wall behind the workshop. A section of the wood planking did not quite match the rest. The grain was slightly different. The color was a hair darker. The nails were newer, their heads less rusted. It was the kind of detail almost no one would notice. But I had spent 1,000 hours of my childhood in this barn. I knew every knot in every board. I knew which planks creaked and which held firm. And this section of wall had not been there when I was a child. I walked over to it. A stack of old truck tires was piled in front of it, 4 tires high. I dragged them aside one by one. They were heavier than they looked. By the time I had cleared them, I was sweating. The mismatched section was about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. There was no handle, no hinge, just a flat panel of wood set carefully into the larger wall. I ran my fingers along its edges. Near the bottom, my fingertip caught on a small, shallow notch in the wood. Barely visible, just the width of a fingernail. I hooked my fingernails into the notch and pulled. With a low, heavy groan, the entire panel tilted inward. A wave of cold air washed over my face. It smelled of deep earth, of old stone, of something that had been sealed away from the world for a very long time. I dug the flashlight out of my duffel and clicked it on. The beam trembled in my hand. I aimed it into the opening. It was not a cupboard. It was not a closet. It was a tunnel. Rough-hewn timbers framed the entrance, thick and dark with age. Beyond them, a narrow passage sloped downward into absolute blackness. The walls were packed earth reinforced with fieldstone. The ceiling was low, maybe 5.5 feet, supported by heavy crossbeams at regular intervals. The floor was hard-packed dirt that had not felt a footstep in a very long time. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A secret tunnel. Under our barn, I tried to remember anything my grandfather had ever said about it. Any hint. Any clue. There was nothing. In 6 years of memories, in all the hours we had spent in this barn, he had never said a word. I stood at the edge of the opening and thought about every warning I had ever received. Mr. Harlan's voice, "Don't get your hopes up." Miss Vance's voice, "Do nothing that would diminish its value." I clicked the flashlight to its brightest setting. I took a deep breath, and I stepped into the dark. The tunnel was colder than the barn, much colder. My breath plumed in the beam of the flashlight. The air had a mineral taste like licking a wet stone. I had to hunch to avoid the ceiling beams. My shoulders brushed the walls on both sides. I moved slowly, testing each footstep because I did not know what was under the dirt. Old wells, old mine shafts, old graves. 50 feet in the tunnel widened. The flashlight beam spread out. The walls pulled back. The ceiling rose. And I found myself standing in a small stone-lined chamber, maybe 10 feet square, with a low arched ceiling, held up by heavy dark timbers. It was beautifully made. The stones of the walls were carefully fitted, packed with old mortar. It was the work of skilled hands. It was the kind of chamber the old moonshiners used to build during Prohibition, to hide their stills, to store their bottles, to keep their contraband away from federal eyes. Oak Valley had been full of such chambers once. Most had collapsed. Most had been forgotten. My grandfather had known about this one. For how long I could not yet say. In the center of the chamber, on a low wooden pallet to keep it off the damp floor, sat a metal footlocker, military green, heavy brass latches, not rusted, not damaged, kept dry and safe by the stone walls for years. A piece of paper was taped to the lid. I took another step into the chamber. My flashlight beam steadied. I read the single word written on the paper in the blocky, careful handwriting I would have recognized anywhere in the world. Lena. A shiver traveled up my spine from the base of my back to the crown of my head. This was not some 100-year-old secret. This was not prohibition. This was for me. Specifically, deliberately, unmistakably me. I knelt on the stone floor, my knees pressed into the cold. I set the flashlight on its base so that its beam hit the ceiling and bounced soft light around the chamber. I rested my hands on the cool metal of the footlocker. I breathed in, I breathed out. Then I undid the latches. They were stiff, but they opened with a clean, deliberate click. The sound echoed in the chamber like a gunshot in a church. I lifted the heavy lid. The first thing I saw was a yellowed envelope. Thick, heavy. My name again written on the front in the same blocky hand. Underneath the envelope, my breath stopped. The footlocker was filled front to back, top to bottom with bundles of cash. Neat rubber-banded stacks of $100 bills, each one wrapped in clear plastic against the damp. Dozens of bundles. Maybe more. I could not count. I could not process. I just stared. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I reached for the envelope with trembling hands. I sat back on the cold stone. I broke the seal. The paper inside was crisp. The ink was a dark, steady blue. And his handwriting, when I unfolded the letter, hit me like a hand on my shoulder. "My dear Lena," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone and you have come home. It also means you are a woman now and that you were clever enough to find this place. I always knew you were the observant one. I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry for leaving you and Nora. My heart breaks to think of you alone. Please know that not a day went by from the day you were taken to the day I drew my last breath that I did not think of both of you. Every single day." My throat closed. I kept reading. "I need to explain some things. The world is more complicated than I ever wanted you to know. After your grandmother passed, I was lost. The farm was too much for one person, and my health was already turning on me. I knew I would not have many years left. My biggest fear was not dying. My biggest fear was what would happen to the two of you when I did. I had debts, not from bad choices, child, but from bad luck. Your grandmother's illness cost more than either of us could ever have imagined. The farm was not earning. If I passed the banks and the government would have eaten everything, you and your sister would have been left with nothing but paperwork. And I could not let that happen. I pressed the letter against my chest. I closed my eyes. For 6 years, I had carried a story inside me. The story was that my grandfather had been overwhelmed and had quietly given up and had let us be taken because he did not have the strength to fight for us anymore. I had told myself that story so many times that I had almost come to believe it. And now in the cold dark of a chamber under the barn, that story was breaking apart in my hands. I opened my eyes. I kept reading. This farm is not just dirt and wood, Lena. It is our story. It is your grandmother's rose garden and your father's tire swing. It is the place you belong. So I made a plan. I started working off the books. Cash jobs for every farmer in this valley who would hire me. Harvests, repairs, fence mending, irrigation. I took jobs I had no business taking at my age. I took them anyway. I hid every dollar. I did not use the bank because the bank would have turned the money over to the creditors. I did not keep the money in the house because I knew they would search it when I was gone. So I hid it here, in the dark, for you. My tears started silently. They ran down my face and fell onto the paper, and I did not wipe them away. It was a race, child. A race between my body and the time I had left. I do not know as I write this which one will win, but I want you to know that every dollar in this box is a day I chose you. Every bundle is a morning I got out of bed when my back said no. Every single bill is a promise I kept to you and your sister. A promise I could not speak out loud, because if I had, they would have taken this from us too. I had to stop reading. I sat in that chamber under the barn in the cold and the dark, and I cried the way I had not cried since I was 12 years old. I cried for the grandfather who had not abandoned us. I cried for the man who had worked himself into the grave, while a silent, frightened girl in a group home across the state had convinced herself that she was not worth fighting for. I cried because the story I had told myself was wrong. I cried because love, the real kind, the kind that does not perform itself, had been waiting for me in a box in the dark for 6 years. And I had almost walked past it. When I could see the page again, I picked the letter back up. There should be enough in here to settle the back taxes. I kept count. It will be close. The county will ask where you got the money. They will be suspicious. You will have to be strong and smart. Tell them it is a private loan from a family friend who wishes to remain anonymous. Tell them a story. You were always good at stories. Do not tell them the truth. To the state, this money is an undeclared asset. They will find a way to take it. This is your inheritance, not theirs. I nodded there in the dark as if he could see me. This money is yours. You can use it to save the farm. That will be the hard road. This place needs more than money. It needs work. It needs love. Or you can take the money and go. You and Nora can start a new life somewhere far from here. No one would blame you. It might even be the wiser choice. I will not tell you which path to take. A woman has to choose her own way. Just know that whatever you choose, I love you. Take care of your sister. Be good to each other. I was ready for the signature. I was ready for his name. But there was one paragraph more, and it was the one that would, in the weeks to come, save my life. There is more I did not write in this letter. Some of it I could not put on paper in case the wrong eyes found it. When you have settled the taxes, when you have taken a breath, when you have decided to stay, look again at the back wall of this chamber. A grandfather leaves more than one gift, if he has the time. I wanted to leave you every chance I could. What I could not buy for you, I filed for. What I could not carry into the light, I sealed in the dark. Be patient. Be careful. The people who do not want you to have this place will recognize the moment you take it that there is more to take. Do not let them find what I hid second. That is the peace they cannot live with you owning. Your loving grandfather, Theodore. I sat with the letter for a long time. The phrase filed for caught in my chest like a splinter. Filed for what? With whom? I looked at the stone wall at the back of the chamber. I could not see much by the flashlight beam. It looked to my eyes like the rest of the walls. But I knew now that it was not. Later, I told myself, not tonight. Tonight, I had already seen enough. He had given me a choice. Run or stay. Take the easy road or take the hard one. And he had told me in the most careful way he knew how that whichever I chose, there was one more door in the dark that was meant for me. I looked at the money. I looked at the stone walls. I thought about a white farmhouse under 3 great oaks, and a coffee cup that had been waiting 6 years, and a pink bedroom full of butterfly stickers that no child had slept in for a very long time. I thought about Nora, 15 years old, pressing her forehead against a wire-reinforced window, watching her sister walk a while that morning. I thought about the choice, and I realized sitting there in the dark that it was not actually a choice. Not for me. I started carefully repacking the footlocker. I counted enough to cover the back taxes, set it aside, and left the rest where it was. I tucked the letter deep into my duffel. I closed the lid. I latched it. I stood, slowly, my knees aching. And then I heard it, a sound, above me, above the barn somewhere in the workshop. A deliberate sound, not wind, not rot, not the settling of an old building. A footstep. I froze. Another footstep. And another. Someone was in the barn. My flashlight beam trembled. I clicked it off. The chamber plunged into absolute black. My ears stretched out, searching the way a blind person's do. Above me, I heard the footsteps pause, shift, pause again. Then, worse than the footsteps, I heard a voice. A man's voice, low, speaking to himself or to a phone I could not tell. I could not make out the words, only the cadence, measured, unhurried. The cadence of a man who believed he was alone and had every right to be here. I pressed myself flat against the cold stone wall of the chamber. I held my breath. I listened. And somewhere above me in the dusk in my grandfather's barn, a stranger was walking around as if he owned the place. My grandfather's last letter was pressed against my ribs inside my jacket. $100,000-something in cash sat in a locker 3 feet from my shoulder. A man I had never met was 50 feet above me, and he did not know I was there. And I understood in that moment with a cold, clean clarity I had not felt in 6 years that my grandfather's death had not been the end of this story. It had only been the first chapter. I stayed pressed against the cold stone wall for what felt like an hour. It was probably 4 minutes. Time does strange things in the dark when a stranger is walking above you and you are trying to hear through 3 feet of packed earth and timber. The footsteps moved slowly across the workshop floor. Pause. Shift. Pause. A toolbox was opened its hinges, whining, then closed. A drawer pulled, then shut. He was looking for something. He was not in a hurry. He was a man who believed that whatever was under his boots belonged to him or soon would. I could feel my own heartbeat in my teeth. Then, just as slow as they had come, the footsteps moved back toward the front of the barn. The great sliding door scraped once, then again. Then silence. Nothing but the drip of water somewhere in the chamber walls, and my own breath shallow and careful in the black. I counted to 300 before I moved. When I finally clicked my flashlight back on, my hand was shaking so badly that the beam skated across the chamber wildly before I could steady it. I took the counted bundles of cash, the ones set aside for the taxes, and sealed them in a waterproof bag from my duffel. I closed the footlocker, latched it, and pushed the wooden pallet back into place. The rest of the money stayed where my grandfather had left it. This was still his vault. I was only withdrawing what I needed. I climbed back up the sloping tunnel, slow and silent, listening for anything that might be waiting at the top. The barn was empty. The stripes of gold were gone from the walls. It was full dark now. The workshop smelled faintly of aftershave, a cologne I did not recognize, cedar and something sharper underneath like black pepper. It did not belong here. My grandfather had never smelled like anything but sweat and sun and old leather. This was the scent of a man who had never done a day's real work in his life. I eased the wooden panel shut. I rolled the stack of truck tires back into place. I stood in the middle of the workshop, flashlight pointed at the floor, and I looked for boot prints. There, in the dust by the workbench. A man's boot size 11 or 12, flat-soled, no tread. Dress shoe, not a work boot. He had walked the length of the workshop, lingered at the back wall where the hidden panel was, and turned around. He had not found what he came for. Not this time. I killed the flashlight and stood in the dark until my eyes adjusted. Through the crack in the barn door, I could see the gravel driveway pale in the starlight. Empty. Whoever he was, he had come and gone on foot or parked somewhere out of sight. I waited another 5 minutes. Nothing moved. No engine. No door. Nothing. I slipped out of the barn and ran for the house. I did not sleep that night. I boarded the front door from the inside with a chair wedged under the handle, and I sat on the floor of the living room with my back against the wall, my flashlight in my lap, the waterproof bag of cash between my feet, and the photograph of me and my grandfather, and a 9-year-old Nora propped on the mantel in front of me. I watched the door. I watched the windows. I listened to the house breathe around me. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I made a decision. 2, actually. The first was that I would pay the taxes. Not because Adelaide Vance had told me I could. Not because Mr. Harlan had told me I could not. Because my grandfather had worked himself to death so that I could. Because somewhere above me in a house that smelled of 6 years of dust, and a kitchen with a coffee cup that had been waiting since May of 2018, a man I had loved had spent his final strength putting one foot in front of the other, every morning in the dark for me. You do not throw away a gift like that. You do not sell it for $25,000 and a bus ticket to somewhere else. You plant it. You water it. You see what it becomes. The second decision was harder and colder. and I felt it settle into me like a stone sinking to the bottom of a still pond. Someone had killed my grandfather, not with a gun, not with a knife, with paper, with interest, with the slow strangulation of a man who was already sick and already alone and already fighting a war that no one knew he was fighting. The boots in the dust upstairs belonged to a man who worked for the people who had done it. And that man was looking for the tunnel. He did not know exactly where it was, but he knew it was there, which meant that somewhere, somehow, someone had told him. That last part was the stone that sank the farthest. In the morning, I walked the 5 miles back to the bus stop and rode into town. I paid the taxes in cash in 2 separate money orders from 2 different currency exchanges, so as not to trigger a single deposit report. It took me most of the day. At the county tax assessor's office, the clerk, a tired woman with a pencil through her hair, looked at me, looked at the money orders, looked at me again, and asked where a girl my age had come up with $94,521. A private loan, I said, from a family friend. She raised one eyebrow. I raised one back. She stamped the papers. The stamp hit the page like a gavel. Parcel 734-B. Taxes paid in full. Lien released. I walked out of that office with a flimsy receipt in my hand, and I stood on the sidewalk in the late afternoon sun, and I let myself breathe for the first time in a week. The farm was mine, not the state's, not Ironheart's. Mine. I caught the last bus back to Oak Valley. The next morning, I called Adelaide Vance from the payphone at the crossroads. I had thought about what to say all night. "Ms. Vance," I said, "this is Lena Hollis. I wanted to let you know that I paid the back taxes in full yesterday." There was a silence on the line. It lasted 3 full seconds. I counted them. "I see," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. Too level. The voice of a woman who has just been told something she did not expect and is deciding in real time what to do with it. "And how did you manage that, Ms. Hollis?" "A private loan from a family friend. They wish to remain anonymous." "Of course," she said. "Well, that is certainly a development. I will inform Ironheart that their offer is no longer under consideration." "Please do." "Ms. Hollis, a word of professional advice. These kinds of informal financial arrangements have a way of becoming complicated. I would be happy to review any documentation to make certain that you are not exposing yourself to future liability." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. "Please do." I hung up the payphone. My hand was wet on the receiver. I wiped it on my jeans. Then I walked across the road to the small diner attached to the Crossroads gas station. And I ordered a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs. And I sat in the window and watched the road. And I thought about Adelaide Vance's voice, about the 3 seconds of silence, about how she had not asked for the name of the family friend, about how a lawyer whose client had just rescued a property from auction would normally be celebrating, or at least performing celebration. She had not performed anything, which meant she already knew within 3 seconds of me telling her that the tax payment was a problem, not for me, for her, and for whoever she had been reporting to. I was on my second cup of coffee when a shadow fell across my table. Theo's granddaughter. The man standing over me was maybe 70, tall, lean, with the kind of sun-leathered face that comes from 40 years of working outdoors. A faded blue ball cap, a white beard cropped close, pale blue eyes that did not look away from mine. "Yes," I said. "I'm Lena." He nodded once. "Calvin Brennan. I own the property east of yours. Knew your grandfather 41 years. Would you like to sit down, Mr. Brennan?" He slid into the booth across from me and set his own coffee cup down with a quiet click. He looked at me for a long moment. The way men of his generation look at people really look, taking the measure of something before they speak. "You're the older one," he said. "The one he used to talk about. Said you were quiet. Said you watched everything. Said you didn't miss much." I felt the back of my throat tighten. I nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss," Calvin Brennan said. "I should have said it 6 years ago. I came to the funeral. You weren't there. They didn't let us." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I figured as much." I swallowed. "Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to tell me the truth. I don't know any other way to tell anything, Miss Hollis. The night my grandfather died, what did you see?" He looked at me a long time. He turned his coffee cup on the saucer. He looked out the window. He looked back. "Not what I saw," he said. "What I didn't." "What didn't you see?" "I didn't see a man give up," Calvin Brennan said. "I drove past that house every night at the same time for 40 years on my way home from the feed store. The kitchen light was on until 9 always. Same time every night. He was reading. He was doing his crosswords. He was living. That's not a man who dies in his sleep from grief. That's a man who is fighting something." What was he fighting? Garrett Kincaid. The name did not land with surprise. It landed with the dull confirmation of a suspicion I had already built a room for. Ironheart. Ironheart. Calvin Brennan nodded. "Kincaid runs it. He'd been sniffing at your grandfather's land for 3, maybe 4 years before the end. Started with offers. Nice offers. Your grandfather said no. The offers got bigger. Your grandfather still said no. Then the county suddenly decided to reassess the property. Taxes tripled in a single year. Your grandfather fought it. The assessor rejected his appeal. Assessor is a man named Dolan Reese. He and Kincaid golf together. If you can call what those two do on a course golf. So they priced him out. They were trying to. And then your grandmother got sick and the bills started stacking up and your grandfather had to start making choices no man should have to make. But he did not sell to Kincaid. Not 1 acre. Kincaid took it personally. I thought about the footlocker. About every bundle of wrapped hundreds. About a sick man somewhere in his 70s hauling hay bales for other farmers in the valley. Because the bank account he had would betray him. I thought about how much pride it had taken. How much love. "Mr. Brennan," I said, "last night someone was in our barn." He went very still. "You sure?" "I heard his footsteps. I saw his prints in the dust. It was a man in dress shoes who smelled like cedar cologne. He was looking for something specific." Calvin Brennan set his coffee cup down with great care. "You were inside the barn." "I was." "Where?" I held his eyes. I made a decision. My grandfather's letter had said, "Tell no one." But my grandfather's letter had also said, "Be careful, and the people who do not want you to have this place will recognize the moment you take it." I was not going to survive this alone. "There's a room," I said, "underneath." Calvin Brennan's pale blue eyes narrowed not with suspicion, but with a slow, dawning recognition. "I'll be damned," he said softly. "The moonshine cellar. You knew about it. I knew there was supposed to be one. Every old Prohibition farm up this valley has one or had one. Most caved in by the 60s. Your grandfather's family were Irish, came over in the 20s. His grandfather ran whiskey out of that very barn. I used to joke with Theo that his was still down there somewhere. He'd just smile and change the subject." He shook his head once. "That smart old bastard." "The man last night didn't find it. But he was close. He was close." Calvin Brennan drained his coffee. "Miss Hollis, you got somewhere to sleep tonight that isn't that farmhouse." "I have the farmhouse." "That's not what I asked." I met his eyes. "Mr. Brennan, I am 18 years old. I have no money, no family, no friends. And my only other option is a group home that just put me out on the sidewalk with a trash bag. That farmhouse is all I have. I am not leaving it." He looked at me for a long second. Something moved in his face. Not pity. Something tougher than pity. Recognition. "All right then," he said. "Then I'll be stopping by. Every night. At 9 o'clock. Headlights up your driveway, 3 long flashes too short. If you see me pull in and I don't flash you hide, that'll mean someone's in the truck with a gun to my ribs. You understand me?" I nodded. I did not trust my voice. "Welcome home, Miss Hollis." The weeks that followed were the hardest work of my life. I cleared debris. I tore out rotted drywall. I scrubbed 6 years of mouse droppings out of the pantry. I patched the worst holes in the roof with tar paper and plywood, climbing a ladder that swayed in the wind, hammering shingles into place with blisters that broke and bled and dried and broke again. I got the well pump running. I got the generator started on the 3rd try, and then the 4th, and then cursing and covered in diesel on the 5th. The lights came on in the kitchen for the first time in 6 years, and I stood under the yellow bulb and cried because it was the first time since I'd arrived that the house felt less like a tomb and more like a house. Calvin Brennan came at 9 every night. 3 long flashes too short. He brought bread. He brought a thermos of soup. He brought one night an old shotgun and a box of shells, and a patient afternoon of teaching me how to load sight safety and fire it. "Not to kill anybody, Miss Hollis," he said. "Just so you know you could." Word spread in the valley that Theo Hollis's granddaughter had come home. The visits started small. An old farmhand named Doc showed up with a working tractor and spent a Saturday disking my front field. A woman named Lillian, who had quilted with my grandmother 30 years ago, came by with 2 boxes of preserves and a recipe book. A young man named Caleb, who ran the feed store and had gone to school with my father before my father died, dropped off a pallet of seed potatoes and refused to let me pay. "Your grandfather gave my daddy a job in '82 when no one else would." Caleb said, his cap in his hands. "We don't owe each other debts in this valley. We just owe each other the right thing." It was in the middle of all this, 2 weeks into my new life, that I decided to go back down into the tunnel. I had been avoiding it, not out of fear, out of reverence. That chamber was the last place my grandfather had touched with his own hands, and I was not ready for a while to share it even with myself. But the money was still down there, and so was I suspected more than the money. My grandfather's last paragraph had been whispering at me for 14 nights. I went down on a Tuesday morning with a real lantern this time and a notebook. Calvin Brennan came with me. He ducked his tall frame under the crossbeams, and when he saw the chamber, he stopped in the doorway for a long moment and pulled his cap off. "I'll be damned," he said again. "Would you look at that?" I opened the footlocker. I showed him the money. His eyebrows went up slightly, but he said nothing. He understood the way country men understand that some things are not to be commented on. There was something else, I said. Underneath, I reached under the last layer of bundled cash, and I lifted out what I had felt the first night, but not had the courage to examine. A leather-bound notebook the size of a Bible. Its cover was stiff with age. Its pages, when I opened it, were filled with my grandfather's careful, blocky hand. It was a journal, but not a diary. A record. Dates, names, dollar amounts. Conversations reconstructed with the precision of a man who knew he might not get another chance to tell the truth. Calvin Brennan and I sat on the stone floor of the chamber, the lantern between us, and we read by its yellow light for almost 2 hours. Garrett Kincaid had first approached my grandfather in the fall of 2014. A polite letter. Interest in acquiring the property for, quote, consolidation purposes. My grandfather had not replied. 6 months later, another letter. This one with a specific offer. My grandfather had written back a 2-sentence refusal. 6 months after that, Kincaid had driven out to the farm personally. My grandfather recorded the conversation almost word for word. Kincaid had complimented the house, asked about the soil, mentioned in passing that the county had been looking at the tax rolls and several properties were due for reassessment. My grandfather had heard the threat clearly. He had asked Kincaid to leave. 3 months later, the reassessment notice arrived. Taxes doubled. Then the next year, they doubled again. My grandfather had appealed to the county. The appeal had been denied by Dolan Reese, the county assessor. My grandfather had researched Reese, found his address, found his wife's business, found his golf handicap, found in a county newsletter a photograph of Reese at a charity dinner standing next to a tall, well-dressed man in an expensive suit with a wide predator's smile. The caption identified the man as Garrett Kincaid, CEO of Ironheart Development. My grandfather had circled that photograph in red ink. Beside it in the margin he had written, "Same tree, different branches," page after page after page. Kincaid's offers escalating, then shifting in tone from friendly to impatient to veiled. A paper trail of men who had sold to Ironheart in the last decade, each sale preceded by a convenient county reassessment. 4 farms in 6 years. All of them now planted in a single type of crop that did not match the soil. A pattern my grandfather had seen and understood and documented. And then at the back of the notebook, the pages I had been dreading. My grandfather had kept a separate list. It was titled in his blocky hand, "People who should not have been in my house." There were 6 entries. 3 were county inspectors, each one with a date and a pretext. Septic inspection, well inspection, right-of-way inspection. Each had spent longer in the barn than the inspection required. Each had left without finding what they were looking for. The fourth entry was Dolan Reese, the assessor, visited personally in 2017 on a pretext of verifying a structure for reassessment. Had asked specifically whether the barn had a cellar. The fifth entry was a man named only as Harlan, social services, visited in early 2018, 3 months before my grandfather died. He had come to ask supposedly about the well-being of the 2 grandchildren my grandfather was raising. My grandfather had described him as, quote, a tired man with a yellow mustache and gravy on his tie. He had asked my grandfather whether the 2 girls had any extended family elsewhere, whether my grandfather had made, quote, appropriate arrangements. I read that entry 3 times. Each time the cold sank deeper into my chest. Mr. Harlan, my caseworker. The man who had handed me a trash bag and a bus token 6 weeks ago. He was at my grandfather's house, I said softly. Calvin Brennan's jaw tightened. 3 months before the end. 3 months before the end. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Kincaid bought himself a man inside the state, and that man has had my sister in his custody for 6 years. I turned the page. The 6th entry was the one I was not ready for. I had suspected the first 5. I had suspected a county assessor, a social worker, inspectors, even Kincaid himself. I was prepared for those names. I was not prepared for the last one. Adelaide Vance. My grandfather had written April 2018. A. Vance, attorney, came unannounced. Claimed she had been retained by the family to review estate planning documents. I have retained no one. She left a card. I called the number on the card. It answered to a receptionist who did not know her name. When pressed, the receptionist put me on hold for 4 minutes and then returned to say that Ms. Vance was indeed with the firm, but was out of the office. I do not believe her. I believe she works for Kincaid. I've thrown out her card. I will not let her in again. I closed the notebook. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. Calvin Brennan watched my face. He did not speak. My lawyer, I said. The woman who handed me the Ironheart offer on the first day. The woman who handed me the key. The woman who I just called yesterday to tell her I had paid the taxes in full. That one. Yes. He took off his cap. He rubbed the top of his head slowly. Miss Hollis, you need to stop using that payphone. You need to stop calling her. You need to start assuming that every word you say on that line is being reported. I already assumed it. He looked at me. A small, slow, approving nod. Your grandfather was right about you. You don't miss much. 3 days later, Nora called me. The payphone at the crossroads rang at 2 in the afternoon, which it was not supposed to do, because I had given the number only to Nora with instructions to call only in an emergency. I was at the diner across the road. I heard it ring. I vaulted the counter before the 3rd ring and had the receiver in my hand by the 4th. Nora. Lena. Her voice was low and fast and scared in a way I had not heard since we were children. Lena, something's happening. Tell me. They transferred Mr. Harlan off my case last week. I got a new caseworker. Her name is Miss Vance. The world tilted sideways. I put my hand flat against the cold glass of the phone booth to steady myself. Nora, listen to me. Listen very carefully. Has she met with you? Twice. She's different, Lena. She's nice. She brought me coffee the second time like I was an adult. And she's been asking me questions. What questions? About you, about Grandpa, about the farm. She said she was helping you with some paperwork and wanted to make sure the information lined up. She asked if I had ever been in the barn. She asked if Grandpa had ever shown me anywhere special. Somewhere underground. The cold sank all the way down to my feet. Nora, what did you tell her? I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. Lena, I don't know what she's talking about. I don't know anything about a barn. Good. Good girl. You keep it that way. Anything she asks about the farm, about me, about Grandpa, you smile and you say my grandfather and I were not close. You say I don't remember much about him. You say that every single time. Can you do that? Yes. And Nora, do you have a phone, a real one? Not supposed to. But Mr. Harlan's replacement. She brought me one. Said it was for, quote, communication between cases. Said I could call her any time. She gave you a phone? Yes. Nora, that phone is listening to you. Take it out of your room. Put it in a drawer. Cover it with clothes. Do not talk near it. Do you understand me? A long pause. Lena, what's going on? I pressed my forehead against the glass of the phone booth. 1,000 things I wanted to say. I chose the only one that mattered. Grandpa didn't abandon us, Nora. He was fighting for us. He's still fighting. And now it's my turn. I need 4 weeks. I will have you out of there in 4 weeks. I swear it on his life. His life, she said softly. Lena, what happened to Grandpa? I'll tell you when I can hold your hand when I say it. Okay. I love you, Nora. I love you too, Lena. I hung up the phone. I walked out of the booth on legs that did not belong to me. Across the road, Calvin Brennan was sitting in his truck watching me. He had come to give me a ride home. He saw my face. He leaned across the cab and pushed the passenger door open. Get in. I got in. I told him. He listened all the way back to the farm without speaking. When we pulled up the driveway, he did not get out. He put his hands on the steering wheel and looked straight ahead at the white farmhouse and the red barn and the 3 great oaks. Miss Hollis, he said finally, I think it's time we went deeper. Deeper where? The tunnel. Your grandfather told you to look at the back wall. Yes. Did you look yet? Not yet. I wanted you with me. His jaw worked once. All right. We went down that afternoon. I brought 2 lanterns and a crowbar. Calvin Brennan brought a heavy rubber mallet and a coil of rope. We stood together in the chamber, and I held both lanterns high, and we studied the back wall. The fieldstones on the sides were dry-laid rough, clearly original to the 1920s. The back wall was mortared smoother, the stones fitted with modern care. And low on the left side, hidden behind a small pile of old canning jars my grandfather had placed there, was a seam, a thin vertical line where the mortar was cleaner than the rest, a crack that did not belong. We moved the jars. We tapped the stones. One of them near the seam sounded hollow. Calvin Brennan worked the crowbar into the seam. He leaned his weight into it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft, grating shift, the stone moved. The section of wall 3 feet by 4 feet swung inward on a hidden pivot. Cold air poured out. Colder than the chamber. Much colder. A new tunnel. This one was older than the first. The timbers were black with age. The walls were not fieldstone, but raw bedrock limestone, carved by water over millennia. The passage sloped gently downward. It smelled of mineral water and wet stone and something else underneath something I did not immediately recognize, something vast and empty and ancient. We went in. The tunnel ran for almost 200 feet. My lantern threw long, jumping shadows. Calvin Brennan had to duck and turn sideways at some of the narrower sections. The walls wept. The floor grew slick. My boots made soft, wet slapping sounds on the wet stone. And then the walls fell away on either side, and the ceiling lifted, and the air changed. We had stepped into a cavern. It was enormous. My lantern could not reach the far wall. The floor dropped away to my right in a gentle slope, and at the bottom of the slope, still and dark and glassy as a black mirror, was water. A pool of it. No, more than a pool. A lake. An underground lake stretching away into the dark farther than my light could show. I walked to the edge. I knelt. I touched the surface. The water was cold as a mountain stream in March. It was so clean that I could see by the lantern's glow down through 15-20 feet of it to the bone-white limestone floor below. Tiny pale things moved down there. Blind cave shrimp, a species that had been separated from the outside world long enough to evolve away from needing eyes. This was not a well. This was not a spring. This was an aquifer. A reservoir of fossil water older than Rome, trapped in the limestone of our valley, and somehow, my grandfather's family had stumbled onto an entrance to it 100 years ago and kept the secret for 4 generations. I knelt at the edge of that black lake and I thought about California, about the drought, about the news reports I had watched in the common room of the group home almost nightly for 6 years. Wells running dry, lawns turning brown, almond orchards being ripped out, whole communities trucking in water because their groundwater had collapsed. A state that would pay almost anything in the current year for a reliable, renewable, untouched underground water source. Garrett Kincaid did not want my grandfather's land for consolidation. He wanted it for what was underneath it. Calvin Brennan knelt beside me. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said softly, "Miss Hollis, you are sitting on about $400 million. I looked down at my reflection in the black water. My face, pale, hollow-eyed, 18 years old, lit from the side by a single lantern. I looked in that reflection like my grandfather. I had never known before how much I looked like him. Then they're going to kill me for it," I said quietly. "Yes," Calvin Brennan said. "They are going to try." I thought about what my grandfather had written at the end of the letter. "What I could not buy for you, I filed for. What I could not carry into the light, I sealed in the dark." I thought about the word filed, about forms and registrations and signatures, about a sick old man who must have spent his last months not only carrying hay bales for cash, but also somewhere in between, sitting across a counter from a federal clerk filling out paperwork. he could not afford to let anyone know existed. "Mr. Brennan," I said, "he didn't just leave me tunnels and money. He filed something." Calvin Brennan looked at me. "Filed what? I don't know yet, but I will." We climbed back up. We sealed the stone door. We left the cavern behind us in the dark, where it had been waiting for 100,000 years. 8 days later, they burned the barn. I smelled it before I saw it. I was in the house at the kitchen table going over my grandfather's notebook for the 40th time when the wind shifted and the smell of wood smoke came in through the screen door. Not wood stove smoke, big smoke, dry timber and old hay and something underneath it sharp and chemical like gasoline. I was on my feet and out the door before I had finished the thought. The barn was burning. Flames were already through the roof. The great sliding doors stood open, wide drawing air like a chimney. In the driveway at the foot of the porch stood Adelaide Vance, in a charcoal suit and impractical heels, a briefcase at her side, watching my grandfather's barn burn with an expression of polite professional sympathy. She turned to me as I came down the porch steps. Her face arranged itself into something that was almost but not quite concern. "Miss Hollis, oh my, I was just pulling up. I saw the smoke. Have you called the fire department?" I did not answer. I could not. My grandfather's barn, his workshop, his humming, every tool he had ever touched, burning. "Miss Hollis, please, I am so sorry. This must be devastating. But I do need to speak with you." I turned to her. Slowly. The heat from the barn was on my face. The roar of the fire was in my ears. "About what, Miss Vance?" "I'm afraid there have been some troubling developments at the county level regarding your guardianship of the property." She opened her briefcase. She extracted a folder. "In light of this unfortunate fire, which I am afraid suggests that the property is not being adequately maintained or secured, the county assessor's office has filed a motion for emergency receivership. A hearing has been scheduled for 2 weeks from today. If the motion is granted, management of the property will be transferred to a court-appointed trustee, pending a full competency review. I have been asked to represent you in the matter. At no cost, of course." I looked at her. I looked at the barn. I looked back at her. A black sedan I had not noticed was parked 50 yards down the road, engine running, driver's face, invisible behind tinted glass. Adelaide Vance smiled. It was a small, professional, cold smile. It was the smile of a woman who had in her own mind already won. "You should take my advice this time, Miss Hollis," she said softly. "Accept Ironheart's revised offer. Walk away with your settlement. Go get your sister. Move somewhere peaceful. Because I promise you the next fire will not be in the barn." Behind me, with a great groaning crash, the roof of my grandfather's barn collapsed into its own burning heart. A fountain of orange sparks rose up into the evening sky and drifted slowly like dying stars across the 3 great oaks, and the white farmhouse and the pink bedroom upstairs that had been waiting for 6 long years for a 15-year-old girl who had never stopped watching the window for her sister to come back. I did not cry. I did not answer Adelaide Vance. I did not even look at her. I walked past her. I walked past the burning barn. I walked to the stone ring of the old well, and I knelt in the grass, and I pressed my palm flat against the cool earth. Under my hand, far below in a chamber no fire could ever reach, My grandfather's footlocker was still sitting where he had left it. His notebook was still pages of blocky handwriting. His secret, his real secret. The black mirror of water 100 feet below was still there, still waiting, still mine. Adelaide Vance did not know that. Garrett Kincaid did not know that. And that for the first time since I had walked out of Bayside with a trash bag in my hand was the only edge I had left. I stood up. I turned to face her. The firelight was on my face. I let her see it. "Ms. Vance," I said, "tell Mr. Kincaid I will see him in court." Her smile flickered just for a second. Then I walked back to the porch of my grandfather's house, and I sat down on the top step, and I watched his barn burn to the ground, and I began in my head to build the case that would bury them all. The barn burned for most of the night. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived 22 minutes after the first flames had cleared the roof, there was nothing left to save. The men worked for 3 hours anyway, hosing down the oak trees in the house and the grass between them. Because in California in August, a fire that is not finished is a fire that is only resting. The captain was a square man in his 50s named Whitlock, and he told me apologetically, standing in the orange flicker with soot on his chin, that the official report would list the cause as undetermined pending investigation. "But off the record, Miss Hollis," he said, "that was gasoline. 4, maybe 5 gallons poured along the south wall. Whoever did this did not care if we knew." "I know," I said. He looked at me for a long time. I was still sitting on the top porch step. My grandfather's notebook was in my lap, wrapped in a dish towel. I had grabbed it from the kitchen table on my way out. I had been holding it the whole time. "Miss Hollis," Captain Whitlock said, "this is the second suspicious fire on a property fighting Ironheart in the last 14 months. I don't know if that means anything to you." "It means everything to me, Captain." He nodded once slowly. "If you need the official report to say gasoline, you let me know. My men saw what they saw." "Thank you." When the trucks pulled away near midnight, Calvin Brennan was standing at the end of my driveway with his old shotgun broken open across his forearm, and a look on his face I had not seen on any man since my grandfather. He came up the driveway and sat down on the step below me. He did not say anything for a long time. He just watched the glowing skeleton of the barn tick and settle in the dark. 41 years I watched that barn," he said at last. "I know." "Your grandmother's wedding was in that barn, Miss Hollis. Did you know that?" "No, sir." "Right in the middle. Hay bales all around the walls. Lanterns hung from the crossbeams. Your grandfather stood where the workbench later went. I stood next to him. I was his best man. I did not trust my voice. I put my hand on his shoulder. He covered it with his own, which was the size of a catcher's mitt and calloused as a boot sole. "Tomorrow," he said, "tomorrow. Tomorrow we go to war." We did not go to war like men in movies go to war. We went to war the way country people go to war, which is slowly and with paperwork and with every neighbor we could find. The morning after the fire, I drove Calvin Brennan's pickup into town, and I walked into the office of Marcus Tate. Marcus Tate was 44 years old. He had a law practice above a hardware store on Main Street, a single secretary named June, who also ran the deli downstairs at lunch, and a framed photograph on his wall of himself as a young man standing next to an older man who I eventually realized was his father. His father had been Oak Valley's public defender for 30 years. Marcus had taken over the practice after his father died. He did wills and land disputes, and the occasional DUI, and Calvin Brennan had told me on the drive-in that Marcus Tate had 4 years ago won a small, unwinnable groundwater case against the bottling company 2 counties over, and had never, not once in the years after, accepted $1 from Ironheart or anyone who worked for Ironheart, though they had tried more than once to put him on retainer. He is, Calvin said, the only honest lawyer in 3 counties, and he is also just stubborn enough to be useful. I sat across from Marcus Tate at a desk covered in organized stacks of manila folders. I placed my grandfather's notebook in front of him. I placed the Ironheart offer letter in front of him. I placed Adelaide Vance's business card in front of him. I placed Captain Whitlock's off-the-record assessment of the fire in front of him. And then I placed slowly, reverently, the waterproof bag containing a single wrap bundle of $100 bills that I had brought from the tunnel. "Mr. Tate," I said, "my name is Lena Hollis. I am 18 years old. My grandfather was murdered slowly over 4 years by a man named Garrett Kincaid and a county assessor named Dolan Reese, and it now appears by an attorney named Adelaide Vance and a social worker named Harlan. My barn was burned down yesterday by someone working for them. My little sister is currently in their reach, and I am told that you are the only lawyer in 3 counties who will not take my retainer and then betray me." Marcus Tate looked at me across his desk for a long, still moment. Then he looked at the notebook. Then he looked back at me. "Miss Hollis," he said, "I am going to ask you some questions. I am going to ask them plainly. You are going to answer them plainly. When we are done, I will tell you whether I will take your case. Is that acceptable?" "Yes, sir." "How much money is in that tunnel?" "About $120,000 less what I already used to pay the taxes." "How do you know your grandfather earned that money legally? Because he wrote it all down, every job, every farmer who hired him, every dollar?" "It's in the notebook." "Have you reported the existence of the money to anyone?" "No, sir." "Have you deposited any of it?" "No, sir. I used currency exchanges and money orders, 2 separate ones under the reporting threshold because my grandfather told me to." "Your grandfather told you to commit structuring." "My grandfather told me to stay alive." Marcus Tate allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Miss Hollis, I want you to understand something. You are not in trouble. The IRS reporting rules are designed to catch drug dealers, not 18-year-old orphans paying their dead grandfather's property taxes in cash. We will get the money properly declared, properly taxed, and properly deposited before this is over. But right now we have bigger problems." "Yes, sir." "The hearing Ms. Vance mentioned. The emergency receivership. 2 weeks from today. She filed that yesterday, before the barn burned." "Yes, sir." "Before the barn burned, Miss Hollis. She filed a motion claiming the property was inadequately maintained before the only evidence of inadequate maintenance conveniently appeared. Which means either she knew the fire was coming or she is a staggeringly unlucky lawyer." "She knew." "She knew." Marcus Tate agreed. "Miss Hollis, I am going to take your case. I am going to take it pro bono. I am going to take it because my father spent his whole career watching men like Garrett Kincaid eat this valley bite by bite, and I promised him the day he died that if I ever got the chance to break one of their teeth, I would not hesitate. Today is that day. Thank you, Mr. Tate. Call me Marcus, now. We have 2 weeks. Tell me about the tunnel. I told him about the tunnel. I told him about the chamber. I told him about the second door. I told him about the cavern. I told him about the Black Lake and the blind shrimp, and about what Calvin Brennan had told me it was worth. I watched Marcus Tate's face change slowly from the professional neutrality of a lawyer to the still astonished calm of a man realizing that the small local case he had just accepted was in fact one of the largest natural resource disputes the state of California had seen in a generation. Mr. Tate, I said, there is one more thing. My grandfather wrote in his last letter that he filed something I have not yet found. Marcus Tate did not move for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, Miss Hollis, a man in your grandfather's situation who suspects a groundwater resource beneath his property and who does not want to announce that fact to the world has exactly one legal tool available to him. It is called a protective water rights registration. It is filed with the Bureau of Reclamation under a sealed provision. It is not indexed in public databases. It does not appear in title searches. It is not visible to developers, competitors, or neighbors. It is visible only to the named heir when the named heir comes of age and requests it by name. When the named heir comes of age. When the named heir comes of age. I just came of age. Yes, Miss Hollis, you did. He picked up his phone. He asked June to get him a contact at the Bureau of Reclamation's Sacramento field office. He put the phone down. He looked at me. Miss Hollis, I need you to do 4 things for me. Can you do 4 things? Yes. 1, I need you to go home tonight and make 5 photocopies of your grandfather's notebook. 1 goes in a safety deposit box. 1 goes to me. 1 goes in a sealed envelope to the FBI field office in Sacramento. 1 goes to a reporter I know named Evelyn Marsh at the Sacramento Independent. She broke the Merced Almond cartel story 5 years ago. She will understand what you have. The 5th copy goes somewhere you tell no one about, not even me. Yes. 2, I need a list of every farmer in this valley who has sold to Ironheart in the last 6 years. Calvin Brennan can help you. I need names, addresses, sale prices, and whether they are currently still alive, still in the valley, and still able to speak. Yes. 3, I need you to tell me everything you know about where your sister is, what her exact legal status is, and whether she can get to a phone that her new caseworker did not give her. Yes. 4, he leaned forward. Miss Hollis, under no circumstance are you to enter that tunnel again between now and the hearing. Not once. Not even for 1 minute. Because I promise you that from this moment forward, someone is watching that farm. And the only thing that is keeping you alive is that Garrett Kincaid still thinks he can take this from you. The moment he decides he cannot, he will change his strategy. And neither of us wants to be standing on that land when he does. Yes, sir. Good. Now, go home. Make the copies. And Miss Hollis, yes, welcome to the fight. The 2 weeks before the hearing were the longest 2 weeks of my life. I made the copies at a drugstore 40 miles from Oak Valley, in a town where no one knew my face. I drove Calvin's truck. I paid in cash. I mailed the FBI packet from a blue box in yet another town, a 3rd one. and I watched the box for 10 minutes after to make sure no one drove up to check it. The copy to Evelyn Marsh I hand-delivered after Marcus arranged a meeting in a diner outside Davis. She was my age's opposite in her late 50s, silver-haired, wearing a denim shirt and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She read my grandfather's notebook over 2 cups of bad coffee. And when she closed it, she looked at me for a long moment and she said quietly, "Miss Hollis, I have been waiting 20 years to write this story." Marcus, meanwhile, worked the Bureau of Reclamation. He was not supposed to be able to confirm a sealed filing. Bureau field clerks are trained to neither confirm nor deny. But Marcus had an old law school friend who had gone into federal water policy, and his old law school friend made one phone call that was never logged. And 3 days later, Marcus called me from his office with a voice I had not yet heard from him. It was quiet. It was careful. It was the voice of a man who had just stopped doubting whether a miracle was real. "He filed it," Marcus said. "April 2017, 1 year before he died. Protective provisional claim. Sealed status. Heir name specifically as Lena Hollis granddaughter. Born 2007. It has been sitting in a federal drawer for almost 6 years, unlisted, unindexed, waiting for you." I sat down on the floor of the farmhouse kitchen. I did not remember walking there. "It's real. It is real, Miss Hollis. It is airtight. It is older than every offer Ironheart ever made. Under federal water law, when a resource claim predates a purchase negotiation by that many years, and the claim is attached to the same parcel as the purchase, the claim is effectively immovable. Kincaid can buy every square inch of your grandfather's land. He cannot touch a drop of the water under it. He never could. He just didn't know." I pressed my hand to my mouth. "Miss Hollis, yes, your grandfather did not just try to save you. He won. 6 years ago. You are not climbing out of a hole. You are climbing out of a hole your grandfather dug you a ladder for before he died." I could not answer. I sat on the floor of that kitchen under the yellow bulb, and I put my head in my hands, and I cried the way a person cries when the shape of the world rearranges itself around them. Not from grief, from something larger than grief. The thing a person cries from when they finally, after years of telling themselves a smaller story, understand that the truth was always bigger than they let themselves imagine. Calvin Brennan made the list of farmers. We drove the valley together in his truck, stopping at farmhouses, sitting on porches, drinking iced tea out of sweating glasses. 7 families, 7 stories that all rhymed. Reassessment notice. Appeal denied by Dolan Reese. Ironheart offer arrives within 90 days. Offer refused. Trouble begins. Fences cut. Wells mysteriously contaminated. Livestock found poisoned. A house fire in one case. A fall from a tractor in another. 4 of the 7 had sold eventually. 2 had held out and then died of natural causes, officially under circumstances their widows would not describe with strangers present. 1, a woman in her 70s named Hattie Larrabee, had held out and was still holding out and had buried 2 dogs. She believed had been poisoned and had a shotgun by the door. And when Calvin Brennan told her what we had found in my grandfather's notebook, she wept. For the first time in 10 years, she said, over something other than her own dead husband. "I'll testify. Hattie Larrabee said. "I'll testify on Theo Hollis's grave." 4 of the other 6 families, after long conversations, agreed to testify as well. The sister problem was harder. Marcus Tate and I worked it out over a late-night phone call from his office to a prepaid cell I had bought at a truck stop. Nora was 15. She was in the custody of the state. Her new caseworker was Adelaide Vance. Any communication between me and Nora was being monitored, probably recorded, possibly transcribed. The phone Vance had given her was, as I had told her, a listening device. But Bayside Group Home was not a prison. Residents were allowed under supervision to make weekly calls home. Nora had technically no home to call, but she had technically one remaining adult relative, me. Marcus filed quietly without fanfare. A petition for supervised telephone contact between siblings, citing California Welfare and Institutions Code. 16,002, the Sibling Relationship Statute. It was a small, mundane filing. Bayside's administration approved it within 48 hours because they had no reason not to. They did not route the approval through Adelaide Vance because it was not a guardianship matter. And so, on the Wednesday before the hearing at 3 p.m., I sat in the kitchen of my grandfather's house with a prepaid phone to my ear. And for the first time in 6 weeks, I heard my sister's voice without Adelaide Vance listening. "Lena, Nora, I love you. I love you too. Tell me what to do." I told her, carefully, in words that would mean nothing to a listener, even if somehow we were wrong about the line. I told her that on Friday morning at 9 a.m., a woman named Evelyn would arrive at Bayside. Evelyn would ask to see Nora. Evelyn was allowed to see her. Nora would answer Evelyn's questions. Nora would answer them completely and honestly, and on the record. And she would say everything that Adelaide Vance had asked her. Every single thing. She would give Evelyn the phone Vance had given her. And Nora would tell Evelyn one more thing and only one more thing that Lena had told her to say. "What do I tell her, Lena?" "You tell her our grandfather did not abandon us. Our grandfather did not abandon us. You remember that, Nora? No matter what happens in the next 4 days, that is the truth. That is the only truth that matters. I'll remember. 4 days, Nora. 4 days." I hung up the phone. I put my head down on the kitchen table, on the same table where my grandfather had once helped me with fractions. And I cried for maybe 5 minutes. Then I stood up, washed my face, and got back to work. There was one more thing Marcus had arranged, and he had not told me about it. He had his reasons. He would tell me later that if he had told me, I would have worried through every remaining hour of those 2 weeks, and I needed those hours for other things. On the Monday morning before the hearing, Marcus served a witness subpoena directly through the family court, bypassing Adelaide Vance's office entirely. The subpoena named one witness, Nora Hollis, age 15, residing at Bayside Group Home, Sacramento. The subpoena required her to testify in person on the matter of Parcel 734-B Oak Valley. The Bayside administrator, a tall woman named Ms. Eddings, received the subpoena, read it, and performed a quiet administrative act of her own. She did not forward the subpoena to Ms. Vance. She drove Nora to the courthouse herself on Tuesday morning in her own personal car, with a small duffel bag of Nora's things in the trunk, because Ms. Eddings was about to lose her job over what was coming, and she had decided that if she was going down, She was going to go down on the right side of it. I would learn all of that later. On the morning of the hearing, I knew none of it. The hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in the county courthouse, a 2-story building of pale sandstone with a dome that was not quite grand enough to be impressive and not quite small enough to be charming. Courtroom 3 was on the 2nd floor. Marcus had told me to be there at 8:30. I was there at 7:45. Calvin Brennan drove me. He was wearing a suit I suspected he had not put on since his wife's funeral. His white beard was trimmed close. He looked sitting in the driver's seat of his old truck like a man going to do something he had been waiting his entire life to do. The courtroom was bigger than I had expected. High ceilings, oak benches, a judge's bench of dark walnut, a single great window along the east wall through which morning light poured in thick gold bars across the floor. Garrett Kincaid was already there when we walked in. He stood at the far side of the gallery with 3 men in expensive suits and 1 woman, Adelaide Vance. She was in charcoal again. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her hands were folded in front of her. Dolan Reese, the county assessor, a florid man in his 60s with the nose of a lifelong drinker, stood next to her. A man I assumed was Ironheart's in-house counsel stood next to Kincaid himself. Kincaid was tall, taller than I had expected from my grandfather's notebook, silver-haired, a face that would have been handsome at 40 and had only gotten sharper with age, a suit that had cost more than my grandfather's truck. He saw me walk in with Marcus and Calvin Brennan, and his face performed for a bare second a small correcting adjustment, a recalibration, like a man who had been expecting a rabbit and was now looking at a wolverine. I did not look at him twice. Marcus had told me, do not engage. I sat in the front row on the left side of the gallery. Calvin Brennan sat beside me. Behind us in the next 3 rows, the Oak Valley contingent filled in. Hattie Larrabee in her grandmother's pearls. Doc with his cap in his hands. Lillian with her Bible. Caleb from the feed store. The 4 other farm families who had agreed to testify. Captain Whitlock in his dress uniform. A dozen other neighbors I had come to know in the last 6 weeks, who had come without being asked because this was what people in Oak Valley did when one of their own went to court. They filled up the room behind you, and they let the people on the other side feel the weight of it on the back of their necks. Evelyn Marsh was in the back row with a reporter's notepad, and next to her in a stiff charcoal blazer. She had clearly borrowed from the courthouse staff. Sat my 15-year-old sister, Nora. I had not known she would be here. Marcus had not told me. I looked at him. He gave me the tiniest shake of his head and mouthed the word later. Nora saw me. Her eyes were wet. She pressed her palm flat against her chest over her heart. I pressed mine to mine. 6 years of fluorescent hallways in one gesture. I turned back toward the front before I broke. The bailiff called us to order. Judge Eileen Sorensen took the bench. She was in her 60s. She had reading glasses on a cord around her neck, and the kind of level, unimpressed gaze that comes from 25 years of watching people lie under oath. Marcus had told me to trust her. He had told me she was the one piece of luck we had. In the matter of the emergency receivership petition concerning parcel 734-B Oak Valley, Judge Sorensen said, Ms. Vance, you filed the petition. Please proceed. Adelaide Vance stood. She was smooth. She was practiced. She laid out in a voice like cool water the case for receivership. An 18-year-old with no prior experience in property management, a farmhouse in disrepair, a barn destroyed by a suspicious fire within 48 hours of Ms. Hollis's lawful possession of the deed. A troubling pattern of what she delicately called, quote, unconventional financial arrangements. An urgent need for Ms. Hollis's own protection to appoint a court-approved trustee until Ms. Hollis could demonstrate competence. She sat down. She looked briefly at Kincaid. He inclined his head a quarter inch. Judge Sorensen looked at Marcus. Mr. Tate. Response. Marcus stood. Your Honor, he said. With the court's permission, rather than respond to the petitioner's specific allegations, I would like to address the premises on which they rest. The premises that Ms. Hollis is inexperienced, that her property is in disrepair, that the fire was suspicious of her, and that the financial arrangements in question are concerning. I believe that once the premises are addressed, the court will find that the petition does not have a foundation left to stand on. Proceed. Marcus proceeded, slowly, methodically, the way a man chops down a big tree. He called Captain Whitlock first. Captain Whitlock testified that the fire had been caused by gasoline poured along the south wall of the barn, and that in his professional opinion this was the second such incident in the county in the last 14 months, and that both properties had been in active negotiation with Ironheart Development at the time. Adelaide Vance objected. Judge Sorensen overruled. He called Hattie Larrabee next. Hattie testified in a voice that shook only at the beginning about her husband's tractor accident in 2019, 3 weeks after he had refused Ironheart's third offer. She testified that she had found in his toolbox after his death a brake line that appeared to have been cut with a knife. She testified that she had reported it to the sheriff, and the sheriff had ruled it accidental wear, and that the sheriff's brother worked for Ironheart. Vance objected. Overruled. He called 2 more farmers. Their stories rhymed. Reassessment, offer, refusal, trouble, sale or death. He called the 4 families who had sold, and each of them one by one told the same story from the other side. The offer, the pressure, the resistance, the small cumulative disasters, the eventual capitulation. Each testified that they had sold for less than the market value under circumstances they now recognized as coerced. By the time Marcus called Dolan Reese to the stand, the air in the courtroom had changed. Something had shifted in the benches. A dozen reporters, not just Evelyn, had filled the back rows. Judge Sorensen was writing a great deal in her notes. Dolan Reese lied under oath for 45 minutes. He said he had reassessed all properties in the valley under standard procedures. He said he had no personal or financial relationship with Garrett Kincaid. He said he had never been to the Ironheart offices. He said he had not, to his recollection, visited the Hollis property. Marcus let him finish. Then Marcus placed on the table in front of him a 3-inch stack of photocopied pages. Mr. Reese, Marcus said, I have here copies of my client's grandfather's personal records. Mr. Theodore Hollis, by all accounts, was a meticulous man. He kept for the last 4 years of his life a careful record of every person who visited his property. He recorded dates. He recorded times. He recorded license plate numbers. He recorded, when possible, the stated purpose of each visit. Mr. Reese, your license plate is on page 31. Your visit to the property is described in detail. Would you like to revise your previous testimony, or should I read the passage aloud? Dolan Reese's face went the color of old paper. Adelaide Vance stood. Objection. Foundation. These are private notes of a deceased individual. Marcus smiled. Politely. Coldly. Your Honor, the deceased individual in question is my client's grandfather. The notes were lawfully inherited, and I would remind the court that this is a civil proceeding, not a criminal one, and the rules of admissibility are accordingly broader. I am happy to provide authentication through a handwriting expert if the court wishes. Overruled, Judge Sorensen said. Proceed, Mr. Tate. Marcus read the passage aloud. When he was done, Dolan Reese asked for a recess. Judge Sorensen denied it. Dolan Reese requested his attorney. Judge Sorensen reminded him that civil witnesses may retain counsel, but not halt testimony for that purpose. Dolan Reese sat on the stand and sweated through his shirt. By the time Marcus was done with him half an hour later, he had admitted to 3 visits to the Hollis property, to 11 rounds of golf with Garrett Kincaid, and to having lunch with Adelaide Vance at a restaurant in Sacramento 3 days before the barn burned. Marcus then called Evelyn Marsh. Evelyn testified that she had visited Bayside Group Home on Friday morning at 9 a.m., that she had spoken with full administrative approval to Nora Hollis, age 15, and that Nora had voluntarily surrendered a cellular phone that had been given to her by her new caseworker, Adelaide Vance. Evelyn testified that the phone had been examined by an independent forensic specialist, whose report she now entered into evidence. The phone the report showed contained software that recorded all ambient audio within 12 feet of the device continuously, and transmitted the recordings to a private server registered to a holding company owned by Ironheart Development. Adelaide Vance stood. Objection. Relevance. Judge Sorensen did not even look at her. Overruled. Sit down, Miss Vance. Marcus called Nora. She walked to the stand in the blazer she had borrowed. Her hair was in the same crooked braid she had worn when she was 9. She placed her hand on the Bible. She said yes, she would tell the truth. Miss Hollis, Marcus said gently. Do you know a woman named Adelaide Vance? She is my caseworker, Nora said. As of 6 weeks ago. Did she give you a cell phone? Yes. Did she ask you questions about your grandfather? Yes. Did she ask you specifically whether you had ever been in the barn on your grandfather's property? Yes. Did she ask you whether your grandfather had ever shown you anywhere underground, anywhere hidden? Yes. Miss Hollis, did she tell you that she was authorized to ask you these questions in her capacity as your caseworker? Yes. Was she? Marcus looked pointedly at the Bayside administrator, sitting 2 rows behind Adelaide Vance. Ms. Eddings stood. She was not. The scope of a caseworker does not include interrogation of residents about property belonging to their adult siblings. That is a severe violation of policy. I was unaware of it until this morning. Thank you, Ms. Eddings. Nora. One last question. Your grandfather, Theodore Hollis, when you were 9 years old, when you were still living on the farm, did he love you? Nora looked at me just once across the courtroom. He loved us more than anything in the world, she said. He did not abandon us. Our grandfather did not abandon us. The room was very quiet. Judge Sorensen removed her reading glasses and set them carefully on her notes. She looked for a long moment at Adelaide Vance, at Dolan Reese, at Garrett Kincaid, and at the row of Ironheart lawyers behind him. Then she looked at me. "Miss Hollis," she said, "please stand." I stood. My knees did not shake. I did not know why. They should have. "Miss Hollis, this court is going to deny the petition for emergency receivership. I am further going to refer Mr. Reese, Ms. Vance, and the leadership of Ironheart Development Corporation to both the State Bar, the District Attorney of this county, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation for investigation into conspiracy witness tampering, illegal surveillance of a minor, and potentially aggravated arson. I am instructing the bailiff to take Ms. Vance's phone and laptop into evidence before she leaves this courtroom." Adelaide Vance stood. "Your Honor, I must protest." "Sit down, Ms. Vance." She sat down. "Miss Hollis, I am so sorry for what was done to your family. The court recognizes you as the rightful and competent owner of parcel 734-B Oak Valley. This matter is concluded. Bailiff." The gavel came down. Marcus had one more card, and he played it in the hallway outside the courtroom. Not in front of a judge, but in front of Evelyn Marsh's recorder and the cameras of 3 local news stations that had arrived at the courthouse that morning, after Evelyn had the night before placed exactly 3 phone calls. Marcus held up a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a federal document, a Bureau of Reclamation Protective Water Rights registration filed in April 2017 by Theodore J. Hollis for parcel 734-B, Oak Valley, California, filed under a sealed provisional provision that had kept it outside every public index for almost 6 years, visible only to the named heir, when the named heir came of age and requested it by name. The document recognized the existence of a naturally occurring subterranean aquifer beneath the property and assigned primary beneficial use rights in perpetuity to the legal heir of the filer. My grandfather had filed it a full year before he died. He had named me specifically as the heir. Garrett Kincaid had spent 4 years and an unknown sum of money and at least one man's life trying to buy property that already had its water rights permanently assigned by federal registration to the one person on earth he could not coerce, could not scare, could not bury in paperwork, and could not in the end predict. An 18-year-old girl with her grandfather's stubborn chin. The headlines the next morning read in large type across 4 counties: Hollis versus Ironheart. By the end of the week, the FBI had opened a formal investigation. By the end of the month, Garrett Kincaid was indicted on 14 counts. By the end of the year, Ironheart Development Corporation was in federal receivership. Its assets frozen, its remaining officers under subpoena, its CEO awaiting trial. Adelaide Vance was disbarred by the State Bar of California. Dolan Reese resigned his office and was arraigned on 6 counts of public corruption. Mr. Harlan was fired from the Department of Social Services, and the internal review of his caseload uncovered 3 additional instances of similar behavior for which he is now awaiting his own trial. I did not go to any of those trials. Marcus said I could if I wanted. I did not want. 4 months after the hearing, after Marcus had filed the emergency guardianship petition under California Probate Code, Section 1510, after I had demonstrated to the satisfaction of the family court that I was an adult of sound mind with stable housing, regular income from a functioning farm, a clean record and a documented history of being the primary emotional caregiver to my younger sister for the entirety of her childhood. A judge in a different courtroom signed a different piece of paper, and Nora came home. She came home in the same black sedan that had driven me away 6 years earlier. I watched it come up the driveway slowly under the 3 great oaks. I stood on the porch of the white farmhouse. The porch no longer sagged. The paint no longer peeled. A new fence, white and straight, ran along the front field. Tomatoes grew in the garden my grandmother had planted decades ago, tended now by hands that had learned at a different kitchen table in a different life. What hands were for? Nora stepped out of the car. She was taller than I remembered. She had her duffel bag in one hand. She looked up at me on the porch. She did not run. She walked. One step at a time up the gravel driveway under the oaks past the spot where the barn had been and would be again. She climbed the 3 porch steps. She set down her duffel bag. And then for a long time we did not talk. We just held on. Rebuilding the barn took us most of a year. Calvin Brennan was the foreman. He would not accept payment. He said he was working off his debt to my grandfather. And when I told him my grandfather had never been owed a debt by him, he said, "Miss Hollis, a man gets to decide for himself what he owes. That is just about the only thing a man really owns." We built it on the same foundation, same red paint, same great sliding doors. Inside, we rebuilt my grandfather's workshop plank by plank. And when Calvin and I finally swung the hidden panel back into place at the end of 6 months, the tunnel was still there, undisturbed, patient, unchanged. We decided, Nora and I, that the tunnel deserved a new life. We hired a structural engineer quietly through Marcus. We reinforced the walls. We ran electricity. We installed ventilation. The first chamber, the stone-lined room where my grandfather's footlocker had been, we transformed into a wine cellar. Calvin's family had been making wine in Oak Valley for 60 years. He taught us. He gave us our first barrels. We planted 4 acres of grapes the spring Nora turned 16. We aged our first bottle in the chamber, where my grandfather's letter had waited for 6 years in the dark. We did not change the cavern. The Black Lake was not ours to change. We installed a heavy locked iron gate at the entrance, and once a year, under the supervision of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, a biologist descended with us to check on the blind shrimp and take water samples. The state recognized the aquifer formally as a Class 1 protected natural resource. The water rights secured by my grandfather in 2017 remained mine and were held by my instruction in permanent conservation trust. Not one drop would ever be bottled. Not 1 cent would ever be made from it. It was not a bank account. It was a gift from my grandfather that had not been meant for selling. It had been meant for keeping. The farm itself found its rhythm. We grew vegetables. We sold them at the farmer's market in town, at a small stall that grew over the seasons into a large stall, and then into a small storefront. And then the year Nora turned 18, and did not leave home because this was now her home. And she got to choose into something larger than either of us had imagined. We began hosting dinners, small ones at first, 6 guests, 8 guests. The food came from our fields. The wine came from our cellar. The guests were served at a long wooden table in a candlelit chamber, 100 feet under the barn. In a room that had been built by whiskey runners in 1924, had hidden a sick old man's last act of love in 2018 and was in the present year the most talked about dinner reservation in the valley. People came from San Francisco, from Los Angeles, from further. They would climb down the narrow sloped tunnel with lanterns in their hands, and they would sit at our table under the low arched ceiling, and they would eat what we had grown, and they would listen if they asked to the story of the man who had built this place for us. What it became saved us, literally. The dinners, combined with the settlement Marcus had won from Ironheart's federal receivership, funded not only the rebuilding of the farm, but also the founding of the Hollis Foundation. The foundation does one thing. It takes young people 3 a year who are aging out of the California foster care system with a trash bag and a bus token, and it gives them what I did not have: a year of stable housing, a year of vocational training, a year of the first genuine adult support most of them have ever known. At the end of the year, they leave with enough savings to begin. Some of them go to school. Some of them go back to their home counties. One of them, the second year, stayed on the farm and is now our herb specialist and is engaged to be married next spring to a young man she met at the feed store. I am 23 now. Nora is 20. She handles the kitchen garden and the foundation's intake program. She is studying agricultural science at the community college in town. She is, I suspect, better at all of this than I am. I tell her so. She laughs. Calvin Brennan is still with us. He is 76. He works a half day most mornings. He sits on the porch of the farmhouse in the evening with a glass of our own wine and watches the sun go down over the 3 great oaks. Sometimes Nora sits with him. Sometimes I do. He does not say much. He never did. But the 3 of us on that porch in the long gold evenings of a California summer know what it is we have built together. Ms. Eddings, the Bayside administrator who drove Nora to the courthouse that morning, lost her job 3 weeks after the hearing, as she had known she would. She did not lose it for long. Marcus hired her himself as director of the Hollis Foundation, and she now runs the intake program Nora helped design. She brings her own coffee every morning in a battered silver thermos. And when our first-year residents arrive on the 1st of September each year, she meets them at the gate and takes their duffel bags, not their trash bags, and walks them up the driveway herself. Last month, I stood in the doorway of the underground chamber, the one that had once held a footlocker with my name on it. A party of 10 had just arrived for dinner. They were from the city. They did not know our story, which was the way we preferred it. They would eat. They would drink. They would climb back up the tunnel at the end of the night, and they would go home to their own lives a little quieter, a little changed the way people are when they have been for a few hours below the surface of the world. I stood in the doorway and I watched them take their seats. I thought about a girl on a concrete step 6 years ago, with a trash bag and a brass key, and $78 who had believed that she was alone. I thought about a grandfather I had been told gave up and who had never given up. I thought about a tunnel that had been dug for one reason and used for another and ended up serving a third. I thought about the piece of paper my grandfather had filed in April 2017, a year before he died. In the quiet and the dark, when he was already too sick to carry a bale of hay for more than 50 feet at a time. I thought about how he must have looked sitting across a counter from a federal clerk, filling in the name of a 12-year-old granddaughter he had not been allowed to hold in 6 months. I thought about how many strangers in this life do the right thing, quietly alone for people they may never see the end of the story with. And I thought about how many of us, if we are lucky, are walking around every day on the quiet, sturdy foundation of somebody else's invisible sacrifice. The world will always try to tell you who you are. It will hand you a label: foster kid, orphan, statistic. It will hand you a garbage bag. It will tell you not to get your hopes up. But the truth is, you get to decide. You get to choose the harder road. You get to build your own home. And sometimes, if you are very stubborn and very lucky and the people who came before you loved you very, very much, what you build will turn out to be saving you at the same time that you are saving it. Our grandfather did not abandon us. He left us the hardest gift a man can leave. He left us a choice. And he left us in the dark under the barn everything we needed to make the right one. He left us a letter. He left us a box. He left us a tunnel. He left us a black lake older than our language. He left us a piece of sealed federal paper with my name on it, filed a year before he died, waiting 6 years in a drawer in Sacramento for a girl with a brass key and a stubborn chin to finally come and ask for it. He left us home.